Well, welcome to the Tennessee Native Plant Society's Native Plant Seminar Series. Tonight we have with us Elizabeth Hermsen. She's a paleobotanist. At the moment, she's based out of the Milwaukee Public Museum in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She has her PhD from Cornell University. She's been employed at a number of universities and museums since she got her degree. And her activities have included doing research, teaching, building educational websites for the public, including working on the Digital Encyclopedia of Ancient Life and Earth at Home Regional Guides to Earth Science. Her current research is centered on fossil plants from two regions, the southeastern United States and Patagonia, Argentina, with a special focus on water ferns and flowering plants. Elizabeth, we're really tickled to have you here. One of the museums she's worked at and done research at is the Gray's Fossil Dig in East Tennessee. And that's how I met up with Elizabeth. Her name was given me by some of the folks there saying, well, we could do a seminar on the plants, but Elizabeth will do a much better job. So I'm looking forward to this immensely. And for those of you who haven't been to the Gray's Fossil Dig yet, I'm going to put in another plug for it. It's off of, excuse me, don't mind my voice. The Fossil Dig is off of 81 in eastern Tennessee. It's real easy to get to and fascinating. It's a combination dig, fossil processing, and actually a museum on site. And they're all together in one location, which is rather unique and special. And it has not been around a very long time. We have a comment that says, it just happens, we're visiting there tomorrow. Congratulations. It's a great spot. You won't be disappointed, and neither will the kids. So without further ado, I'm going to say, Elizabeth, turn the floor over to you.
All right, well, thank you for that introduction. Thank you for having me here to talk about Gray Fossil Site. So I know, I guess I should get to the title slide, huh? And I should share my screen. I will get there. Let's see.
You're doing fine.
Here we go. So there we go. All right. So I know that the title of the talk is Fossil Plants of Tennessee. I have mostly worked on Gray Fossil Site, so that is what most of the talk is going to be about. But I did just want to say some words at the beginning about some of the other fossil plants that you can find in Tennessee or that are important in the fossil record of Tennessee. So some of the oldest plants you can find in Tennessee are associated with coals. And these fossils are from the Pennsylvanian period. So the Pennsylvanian is about 323 to 299 million years ago. If you don't know your geologic timescale, for reference, that would make these plants older than the dinosaurs. So they existed before the dinosaurs even existed, and at least the coal swamp forests that they were part of disappeared before the dinosaurs arrived. So the maps on the slide are two maps of the US. This one shows basically the distribution of these coal swamps in the eastern US, the little kind of blue hashed areas during this time period. So they were quite extensive. And then on the right, you can see the distribution of coals in the United States. So A lot of the areas in gray are these Pennsylvanian age coals. You can see that they occur quite extensively in the east, including in Tennessee, kind of the eastern to central part. Not all coals are Pennsylvanian age. So there are coals, for instance, in the coastal plain, and a lot of coals in the western United States that are actually younger than the coals you find in Tennessee. So coal forms when you have peats, so this buildup of organic matter in these swamp forests. The peat is getting buried, it's getting compressed, and over time it's becoming purer and purer in carbon. And so the amount of compression and purity determines what type of coal it is: lignite, bituminous, or anthracite. So a lot of the coals here in the east are bituminous coals. There is some anthracite coal as well. So these ancient swamp forests that were found in Tennessee and also pretty extensively in the east are responsible for these deposits. And they were made up of a lot of different kind of weird plants. So in the middle here is actually a diorama from the Milwaukee Public Museum. If you go to any natural history museum where they have the March Through Time, they probably have a diorama or a painting of a coal swamp. The plants in these coal swamp forests were things like big lepidodendron trees or scale trees. So there's a drawing of one here over on the right. These things are related to modern club mosses. They're actually mostly closer related to the modern quillworts. So little tiny plants today, but very giant trees in the past. There are also calamites. These are related to the horsetails, so reconstructed here. Here's a fossil of one of the stems, and also fossils of the leaves of these ancient horsetail relatives. There were also extinct plant groups in this forest. So things like seed ferns, these were plants with fern-like leaves that produce seeds. There were also tree ferns, there were conifer relatives. So there were a lot of weird things growing in these forests. These are very common fossils in the East. So if you're in an area where coals are produced, you may find some of these coal swamp plants. The other type of plant fossils that you find in Tennessee, other than gray, and that are very well known, are Eocene fossils. So the Eocene is an epoch. It's about 56 to 34 million years ago. For reference, these fossils are younger than the dinosaurs. So the dinosaurs went extinct about 66 million years ago. These fossils occur millions of years after that. They exist during a very warm period in Earth history. If I have time towards the end of this presentation, I'll get back to talking about the Eocene a little bit because it's important for understanding plant distributions today. So these fossils are from the coastal plain. They occur in western Tennessee, also Kentucky, northern Mississippi. These fossils were found in clay pits. So that's how they were actually discovered. One of the problems we have with finding fossils in the eastern United States is that it's very vegetated. Even rocks and soils that might be exposed will be covered with vegetation very quickly if they're not somehow maintained bare. So a lot of fossils might be exposed by things like road cuts and quarries and things like that. So the fossils you see here, up here is the hornwort, Ceratophyllum, an aquatic plant, some legume pods in the lower left. And then over here on the right is fruits of an extinct plant called Paleocaria. This is a member of the walnut family. And although this genus is extinct, modern relatives occur in the tropical Americas and also occur in Asia. And keep Asia in the back of your mind too, because it will come up again later. So, Gray Fossil Site is in northeastern Tennessee. This site was discovered in the year 2000 during road construction. Fortunately, the construction was stopped so the site could be investigated further, and the decision was made to actually preserve the site. So it wasn't destroyed by the road building. So there's a satellite view down here on the lower left where you can see the museum. The excavations actually occur right behind the museum. And so there are excavations during the summer. So yeah, it's a very unique area that it does have the excavations on site with the museum and that the excavations are ongoing. Up on the upper right, you can see some of the excavation area and some shelters where some of the prep work is done. And then down here on the lower right are just some exhibits from the site. And I'll talk a little bit more about the vertebrates in a minute. So what about the age of the site? So the relevant geologic time divisions when talking about gray are the Neogene period. So this period is from 23 million years ago to 2.6 million years ago. It's divided into two epochs, the Miocene, which is 23 million years ago to 5.3 million years ago, and the Pliocene, which is 5.3 million years ago to 2.6 million years ago. So we're talking about millions of years, but geologically speaking, this is very young. So from my perspective, it's a young site. So how do we know how old the site is? Well, in the case of gray, the age estimate comes from looking at the vertebrate fossils that occur at the site. So basically, it's a type of biostratigraphy. You're looking at the age ranges of different animals at the site, which is what the chart at the bottom of the slide shows. And where they overlap kind of gives you an idea of the age of the site. So in this case, the age of the site is estimated to be 4.9 to 4.5 million years old. So why does gray occur where it does? This is occurring in a part of Tennessee where the bedrock is very, very ancient. It's way older than Pliocene. It's older than the dinosaurs. It's very unusual that these fossils would be preserved here. Well, the reason they're preserved is because gray fossil site is interpreted as an ancient sinkhole deposit. So basically the bedrock at the site is carbonate bedrock. It's carbonates are like limestones and dolostones. And if water gets into this rock, it infiltrates the rock, it can start to dissolve it and form cavities in the rock. And so this is how you get things like caves. In some cases, the roof of that cavity may become unstable and it may collapse. And you form a sinkhole where it becomes exposed to the outside. And in this case, then water would have filled in the bottom of the sinkhole and you have a sinkhole pond or sinkhole lake. So the top illustrations here show the formation of a sinkhole. Down here on the lower left is actually a picture of a relatively modern sinkhole in Florida. These do occur in areas where there is carbonate bedrock and they can open suddenly and catastrophically. So there can be no warning that the sinkhole is going to collapse. Down here on the lower right is a reconstruction of sort of what gray would have looked like in the past. So there's a sinkhole pond or lake surrounded by forest. You can see the sediment accumulating in the bottom. So the fossils would be preserved when animals die and they get washed in or fall into the water. Plant fragments, so plants are always dropping things. They're dropping leaves, they're dropping fruits, whatever. That's getting washed into the lake or pond. It's getting buried in the sediment and it's getting preserved. All right. So gray is an interesting and important site because it's one of the few sites of this Neogene age that has plant macrofossils, so larger plant fossils, things larger than like pollen and spores in the eastern United States. So this slide just is a map of some of the major sites that are between 23 and 2.6 million years old in the eastern United States. You can see gray here is kind of isolated in the Appalachian region. Pipe Creek Sinkhole is a similar type of site in Indiana that's also a similar age. So that one's pretty interesting comparison site to gray. There's Brandywine in Maryland, Brandon Lignite in Vermont, and then there's really a concentration of sites in the Gulf Coastal Plain. And this isn't all of them. This is just some of the major localities. So gray is really it provides a unique opportunity to see what the Appalachian region was like at this time. There isn't a lot of information about that. All right, so in terms of the climate, what was gray like in the past? There is evidence from different types of studies, different lines of evidence. I'm not going to go into it in detail here, but some of it comes from plants, some of it comes from animals, some comes from isotopes. Basically, the bottom line is that gray was probably somewhat warmer, somewhat wetter, and maybe less difference between the seasons. So less seasonality at that time. In addition to sort of these analytical studies that are cited over here, there are also things at the site like this alligator. So there are alligators at the site, and even though alligators are relatively cold tolerant for things related to crocodiles, they're still not that cold tolerant. So it's telling you the site's warm. There are also beaded lizards. Beaded lizards are the group that the Gila monsters are in from the southwestern US. So also suggesting that it's pretty warm. All right, so the site is probably best known for its vertebrate fauna. Everybody loves the vertebrates. I know this is the Plant Society, so you're more interested in the plants, but the vertebrates are cool. So there are mastodons at the site. So this is the lower jaw of a mastodon and also some tusks. This is an extinct, on the bottom right, is an extinct North American rhino. In the center is a tapir. So tapirs are one of the most common kind of large to medium-sized animals that's present at the site. And then one of the other interesting things at the site is this red panda. So again, to highlight, we have another Asian element in the eastern United States. All right, so what about the plants? So plant fossils can come in a number of different types. They can be preserved in a number of different ways. So on the left, I have some examples. Here are some leaf impressions. These are from Idaho. This is a piece of petrified wood. It's probably from Arizona. This is actually a cast of a stump of a very ancient tree from one of the world's oldest forests, which occurs in New York. So this is near Gilboa. The fossils of gray are different than all of these. So over here on the right, we have some gray fossils. This is on top is a display that I think is no longer there, but it was a display of some of the fossil plants. On the bottom, what you're looking at, bottom left here, is the base of a petri dish. So it's a relatively small container, and those are plant fossils inside of it. So this is sitting on a microscope. So you're not looking through the microscope at it. This is just a picture of it as it would look if you just looked at it. And then bottom right here would be a picture of a fossil under a microscope. So the scale here is 1 millimeter. So this is very, very small. All right, so how do we find these fossils? They're super tiny fossils. You know, we probably have an idea, like with vertebrates, you go out, maybe you see a bone, you start digging. But how do you find something this small? Well, at Gray, they're very interested in knowing all about the ecology of the site. So as they dig up the larger fossils at the site, they keep all of the sediment from around these fossils. And then people actually sieve the sediment. So that's what's going on here. They've got screens and they're sieving that sediment in water. And then they dry the fragments that have been separated from the sediment. And then there are teams of volunteers, mainly, that pick through all of the stuff to look for things that are interesting. So things that you can find at the site are tiny vertebrate remains, so very small, you know, pieces of very small animals. They're usually going to be isolated. And you can also find plant fragments. So for an idea, again, of how small these are my fingertips holding a vial with 10 seeds. They're not even filling up the vial. A lot of the fossils can be put into gel caps, like you would put a vitamin or medicine in. So they're very tiny. The types of plant fossils we find, so there are some leaves. There are fruits, there are seeds. So this thing here, the spiky thing, is possibly a cocklebur fruit. This thing with the holes in it, I actually have no idea what it is. And then down here is maybe a preserved piece of tendril. The other thing that we find at the site are endocarps. So endocarps are the pits or the stones of the fruit. So if you have a peach, the type of fleshy fruit that has this hard inner fruit wall, that hard inner fruit wall is the endocarp. And when you find fossils, of course, all the flesh outside the endocarp is going to be rotted away. It's not going to preserve. So you'll find the endocarp isolated. It may or may not have a seed or seeds inside. All right, so how do we identify the fossils? That's the next thing. We've got the fossils, we've separated the fossils. Now we need to identify the fossils. So basically we have a bunch of fruits and seeds that are unknowns. So we can use our background knowledge, what do we already know, what looks familiar to us, and compare to modern fruits and seeds. Remember, these fossils aren't that old. So on the right are some modern examples of passion flower seeds and also Chinese witch hazel. We can also look at other floras that are similar in age. There are other floras from the southeast that sometimes have similar types of preservation. So these are examples of bald cypress fossils from the Miocene of Maryland. So they're a bit older than gray. Also some fruits and seeds from the Hattiesburg flora in Mississippi. Again, these are older than gray. But they're not so much older that the floras are necessarily going to be that different. You can also look at European floras. So Europe has a very extensive brown coal deposits that preserve a lot of fruits and seeds. And a lot of work has been done on them. So it's a good place to look for comparisons to your fossil flora. Other areas, fossil floras from Asia, and maybe even South America. Although probably your best bets are Europe and Asia is the first pass. All right, so just an example of finding and identifying something. I just want to talk a little bit about passion flower. So Gray Fossil Site has 2 passion flowers. I'll talk about one of them. The passion flowers are a genus, Passiflora, that has over 600 species of plants. So it's a really diverse group. Most of the species occur in the Americas. There are a few species, about 25, that occur in Asia to Australia. They seem to be 2 separate groups of Passifloras that occur there. So very diverse. They have these interesting flowers, of course, very, very complex, very showy. And their fruits here, so if you cut open a passion flower fruit, what you're going to see inside are all these seeds surrounded by flesh. So these are not actually flesh that comes from the fruit wall, they're arrows. So if we find passion flowers preserved at Gray Fossil Site, we're not going to find, most of the things that you would probably use to identify the plant. We're not going to find the leaves, we're not going to find the flowers. Most of the structure of the fruit is going to be gone. We just find the seeds. So these are passion flower seeds from Gray Fossil Site. Basically, the top row just shows whole seeds, so you can see the external or the outer part of the seeds. In the center, there are some details. So the upper part of the seed, the base, the outer part of the seed coat. And then from H and I in the bottom row, these are seeds that are split in half, so you can see the interior. And in this case, the seeds were actually found that way. Nobody broke them open. So this shows basically the structure of the seed coat. It also shows the inner surface of the seed coat. For comparison, here's a modern seed of Passiflora incarnata. This is the maypop, which is one of the Passifloras that is native to the southeastern US. So if you just look at it, it's like, that's a Passiflora seed, that's passion flower. But when we're writing this, describing it scientifically, we can't just say, well, it looks like a passion flower. Part of the reason for this, of course, is that plants that aren't related to one another can produce similar structures. So, for example, we know that there are several different groups of pitcher plants, so carnivorous plants that produce pitchers. And we have them in the Americas, but they also occur in the Old World, and the groups are not closely related to one another at all. They just converge on a similar type of structure. So we need to make sure that this isn't a look-alike, it's not something else that looks similar. So how do we build the case? How do we investigate this? Well, in the case of the passion flowers, it turns out that for whatever reason, people have done a lot of research on the seeds of passion flowers. They have published a lot of pictures of them, put measurements of them. So there is a lot of information available about what these seeds look like. In addition to that, a Colombian scientist named Camila Martinez went through and kind of collated all this information into coming up with some characters that you could use to identify passion flowers. And then I came by and refined that a little bit a few years later. So we have a list of characters that you can use to identify isolated passion flower seeds or seeds of closely related plants, because there are plants closely related to passion flowers that have similar seeds when you find them isolated, which is how you're going to find them in the fossil record. So you can look at seed shape, symmetry, size. Length width ratio is kind of similar to shape. It's a rough estimate of shape. You can look at apical appendages. So do they have these points sticking up from the top of the seed? The ornamentation. So a lot of them have pitted seeds, but some have groove seeds. Are the seeds compressed? So we can see the compression of the seed from gray fossil sites. So yes, they're compressed. Yes, they have pitted seeds. Yes, they're the right size. Yes, they have this appendage. Some of the key features are, do they have ruminant endosperm and a palisade seed coat? So of course the endosperm is the food for the developing embryo in the seed, and you can see yourself, it's not preserved. But when it's ruminant, it means that the endosperm has these indentations in it. And in the passion flowers, the indentations are caused by bumps on the inner wall of the seed coat. So we can clearly see the bumps there. So we can infer that it has this ruminant endosperm. We can also see the structure of the seed coat, and that its palisade means it has a structure that basically looks like these rods that are laid parallel to one another. So it has the right seed coat structure as well. So this is all good evidence that, yeah, this is Passiflora. But Passiflora is a big group. So further investigation shows that there's a lot of diversity, and sometimes you can use the diversity of seeds to determine which group of passion flowers something goes in. So passion flowers have a really actually complicated classification below the genus level. And I'm not going to go through it, but just some examples of different seed structures. So you have these grooved and ridged seeds in one group here. You have winged seeds in another. These kind of have 3 points at the upper tip of the seed. So there are ways maybe to try to figure out where in the passion flowers a seed goes. Now, in the case of the gray fossil site seeds, they're not super distinctive, but again, they look a lot like Passiflora incarnata. They're in the range of the modern species. So probably there is some relationship there, especially given the age of the fossil seeds. So this is the rough distribution of Passiflora incarnata. I guess maybe it's a little hard to estimate just because it's kind of weedy what the actual full native distribution is versus kind of expanded or introduced. And then the other thing to note, there are some little things like this triangular apical appendage and this ridge below it, which isn't that well developed in this example of the maypop seed. But that's also another little feature you can look at structurally that might indicate a relationship. And for comparison, this is a seed of maybe the type of Passiflora you would find in a grocery store here in the US, Passiflora edulis. All right, so it's just an example of how one might go through making a case, well, both initially identifying something, but also making the case for, yes, this really is what I'm saying it is, just by going through character by character. All right. So the next part of the talk, I just want to go through and show pictures of the diversity of the site because it's cool. Just to give an examples of what's there. So first thing, bald cypress taxodium. Up here on the upper left are fossil seeds. Upper right are modern seeds for comparison, so they're really weird looking seeds. There's also taxodium like pollen that's come out of the site and also little branchlets. So there are multiple parts of these trees that have come out of the site. There are other types of conifers. I haven't identified these. I don't know what they are, but there are some cones and some seed cone scales, and this is just a little pine cone for comparison. So flowering plant, trees, and shrubs. The site is full of oaks. It's got a ton of acorns. So little nuts, little caps. Here's an impression of what appears to be a cap. So that might be a very difficult project to take on just because they're so abundant, and oaks are a little bit more of a difficult group. There are hickories at the site. These have been described as Caryoptenesiensis. There's prickly ash, the genus Xanthozylum, which is also the genus the Sichuan pepper is in. There are two species from the site. One of them looks like has seeds similar to a modern North American species. So that's the one here on the left. Other trees and shrubs at the site. So there are rubus, raspberries or blackberries. These are actually endocarps that are found at the site. Winter hazel, this is a relative of the witch hazel. So this is Coralopsis. This grows in Asia. Down here at the bottom center, we have bladdernut, Staphylia. And here's some bladdernut fruits just to illustrate the tree. Upper right, betula, birch catkins, or birch-like catkins with a picture of a modern catkin. And then down here, tupelo gum, this is Nyssa. These are endocarps as well, and just modern Nyssa for illustration. Climbers. So interestingly, there are a lot of climbing plants at the site, a lot of vines, maybe herbaceous vines as well as woody vines. So I mentioned there are two species of Passiflora at the site. One of these is Passiflora appalachiana, which looks like maypop seeds. The other one is Passiflora sulcatusperma. This looks like a lot more like seeds from a more Mexican to Central American to South American base group of Passifloras. So it's a little bit different. Sargentodoxa up here on the upper right. This is a type of vine from Asia. The seeds have been found at other sites in North America, other fossil sites. Down here, grapes. There are 3 species of grapes at the site represented by seeds. And then down here at the lower right, moon seeds. So these are actually similar to Chinese moon seeds. So this is an example. I didn't find a picture of a live plant there. Herbaceous angiosperms at the site. So up here is an achene that appears to be knotweed. Upper center is really problematic. So these little shiny seeds at the site, an intern apparently discovered that some of them are contaminants. They're Phytolacca seeds. So some of these types of seeds might be fossils, but some of them are probably modern seeds being brought into the site. They suggested it was by birds. It could also be something like water washing things into the site. So this is one of the problems of working on a site this young, where you might have modern things representing the fossil record. Is how do you tell the modern from the fossil? Down here with beggar ticks, similar thing. Not quite sure with these if they're fossil or not. They occur occasionally at the site. These possible bugle weeds, and then I showed the cockleburr before. A couple of other interesting things. Oh, before I get to those, miscellaneous plant structures. So not everything's a reproductive structure. There are these pieces of grasses at the site. Other investigators have suggested that these could be a rudinaria. This is the native North American bamboo. I'm not sure exactly how one would identify them from other grasses, but that's maybe a problem that can be worked on in the future. So that's interesting. And then there are things like thorns, apparently tendrils in the site as well. So not everything is technically flora. If you like fungi, there are these weird clusters at the site. They're pretty common. And they bothered me for a really long time because I had no idea what they were. And I thought maybe they're gall, maybe there's something like that. I kept looking at pictures of galls. And finally, one day, for some reason, I'm like, well, maybe it's a fungus. So I started looking for pictures of fungi, and these popped up. This is a modern fungus that's called cramp balls. I think because the theory was you could use them to treat cramps. And they're a wood decaying fungus. So there are wood fragments at Gray Fossil Site. They're very common. So this would fit with what we know of the site. So down here's another example of a modern one. This picture on the lower right is another fossil. This is from China that was unidentified that looks very similar. So one of the interesting things about this is that fungal fruiting bodies like this are pretty rare in the fossil record. So it's a really interesting find. And another one, so the story behind this is interesting as well. I think I showed this as a meeting as an unknown. I didn't know what these fossils were. And one of my colleagues suggested maybe it's caterpillar grass. It's poop. And it turns out there is a small fossil record of caterpillar poop. And this is modern caterpillar frass for comparison, so it does look very similar. So that might be what these structures are. All right, so this is just a summary of the flora. I'm not going to go through this whole slide. The stuff in bold has been described formally. The stuff that's not in bold has not been described. So there's a lot of stuff that isn't described, and I'm sure there's a lot more stuff to find and identify that's already been already in the collections at Gray Fossil Site and probably in the sediments. All right, so the last thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was biogeography. So biogeography, of course, is basically the geography of organisms, the geography, in this case, of plants. And to really talk about this, just to kind of set the scene, this big graph here starts on the right at about 66 million years ago and goes to the present on the left to 0 years ago. And basically what it's showing, or what it's following, is global temperatures. So basically after the extinction of the dinosaurs, in the early part of this era we call the Cenozoic, the world was very warm. And it hit a peak around 50 million years ago. And then global cooling started. There was a plateau in the Miocene, a little bump. And then cooling began again. At the time of Gray, which is somewhere in here, we're kind of at a low point in that era. And then, we're coming towards the modern Pleistocene at the ice ages. So we have this trend kind of over time of cooling. The other thing we have is changes in the positions of continents over time and how land masses are connected. So in the northern hemisphere, if you go back, 69 million years ago, 50 million years ago, there's a lot more connection between North America and Europe in the north over land. And also, and even today, Asia and North America in the Alaska-Russian region are very close to one another. So what significance does this have for plant distributions and for gray? Well, this map is looking kind of at the North Pole here during the Eocene. So this is the early Eocene, 56 to 48 million years ago. You can see North America and Asia are connected. But also notice that North America through Greenland is connected to Europe. So in the Atlantic Ocean, in the North Atlantic, there's a spreading center. And over time, North America and Europe are slowly moving away from one another. So if you go back into the past, they're a little bit closer. The other thing that's important, of course, is that it's a lot warmer. So you're not having, what we think of today as these Arctic temperatures in the Arctic. So just as a demonstration of this, this is a vertebra from some sort of crocodile relative that came from Arctic Canada. And it's from the early to middle Eocene, so it's from this time period. So basically what this means is that plants today that occur at lower latitudes could live at higher latitudes in the past. And they could use these routes over the North Pacific and the North Atlantic to expand their distributions across these continents. So over time, these connections have been severed. As I mentioned, the Atlantic Ocean is widening, it's spreading. We also have cooling over time. So fewer plants can grow at high latitudes because it's cooler, so they can't tolerate the temperatures. Also in continental interiors, like the interior of North America, we have drying. And so what that does is it fragments these habitats that were available in the past for certain types of plants. And these plants are now restricted to what we would call refugia. So they're restricted to areas like Eastern North America, like Eastern Asia. These are remnants of formerly broader distributions of these forests that occurred in the past, in the Eocene. So this is why we see these connections, for instance, between Eastern North America and Eastern Asia again and again. So examples from gray fossil sites of Asian elements. So there are some genera that only occur in East Asia today: Sargentidoxa, Coralopsis, and Cinnamonium. So the Chinese moon seed, I don't think Sargentidoxa has much of a common name, and then the winter hazel. And there are also some species that are thought to be most closely related to Asian species. So for instance, there are grapes that are native to North America, but two of the grape seeds at Grape Fossil Site look most like grape seeds from Asian grapes. Similarly, the Xanthozylum from Gray, the second species that's rare, kind of looks like an Asian species, and also the bladdernut looks like an Asian species. In addition to these Asian elements, we have elements of the southeastern North American flora today. So of course the passion flower, one of the passion flowers, and also possibly this cane, this bamboo. Oh, and I just wanted to point out here on the slide that also there similar fossils of grasses occur at Pike Creek Sinkhole in Indiana, which is similar age to gray, but further inland, of course. There is also another Eastern North American element that's a little weird. Most of the Xanthozylum seeds, the prickly ash seeds at Gray, look like the seeds of Xanthozylum americana. That occurs to the north of Gray today, mainly. So unusual. There are also southeastern coastal plain elements. So these include things like the bald cypress. So the distribution of bald cypress in the US is mainly coastal plain. And also the tupelo. So in a thesis, the student Noel had compared the tupelo at Gray to a species that occurs in the coastal plain and is really restricted today. There are possibly neotropical elements. So the other Passiflora seed at Gray looks like a group that's primarily distributed, like I said before, in Mexico and Central America and into South America. There is a widespread native southeastern North American species in this group as well. But the Gray fossils don't look most similar to its seeds. They look like some of the other seeds. So possibly this is a neotropical connection. And then there are some extinct things at the site. So examples of this are Cavalignum prachetii. These are endocarps. They're weird. The initial possible identification on these was a genus called Symplochos, the sweet leaf, but these endocarps are actually different. So it's unclear what they belong to. Over here, the hickories. So of course, hickory is not extinct, but modern hickories occur in Eastern North America and Eastern Asia. And the hickories from Gray were compared to an extinct group of hickories from Europe. And interestingly, the Gray hickory species also may occur at Pipe Creek Sinkhole in Indiana. So this is another connection to this other fossil site. So with that, I think I will wrap it up. Gray is a diverse and very interesting site. I think it tells us a lot about the development of the flora in the eastern United States. And I think there's still a lot more to find from there. So definitely, if you have a chance, go and visit the site.
Wow. Thank you. Oh, where to start? Does anyone have questions? If so, raise your hand. Jonathan?
That was really cool. It's such a cool place. I was wondering, I wondered this the last time I visited up there. I didn't think to do the kind of research to get the answer, but do we have a sense of like the paleogeography of the Southern Appalachians in like the late Miocene, early Pliocene?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm not entirely sure about that one.
Just wonder like if there are, kind of swampy elements at Gray,
Mhm.
vertebrates and the plants and everything. I mean, they had to get there, right? So I'm wondering,
Right.
was the Tennessee Valley like? Do we think was it? I don't know. Like the Tennessee River is like slower moving, or like more kind of low lying areas.
Yeah, I really don't know what to tell you about that one, and it is an interesting question, but I would just be speculating at you. So yeah, but it is an interesting question. It's something I should look into.
Brian Hendricks, you have your hand up?
I do. I was curious at the site, and you kind of hinted on it. You talked about some Asian possible plants, but I was curious if there was something at the site that clearly made people say, how in the world did that get here? That does not belong here. I didn't know if there was something that just stood out like, we're a non-native versus, of course, how do you figure out what's native back then at that time? But I was just curious if there was something that you found there or they found there that you know about that just everybody's just confused on. Why is that here?
Um, I don't really feel that way too much about the site. The thing is, we have a good idea of the fossil record, like the older fossil record, a lot of these plants. So it makes sense when you look at it from that perspective. To me, the interesting question about Gray and the interesting question about the Eastern North American flora generally, if you look at it this time compared to today, is why do certain things go extinct? Like there's certain things that
Right.
persist in Asia but go extinct here. So that one is a little bit weird, like Sargentodoxa, that seed that's just in Asia, why is it extinct? So, but I don't think there's been anything too surprising. I do think it does kind of, fill in a little bit more information about how long things were persisting in North America and stuff. But yeah, it's kind of expected.
All right. Thank you.
Mhm.
Toby Koosman asks, are there any pawpaw fossils at the site? And He's asking because of the relationship with mastodons.
Oh, so far as I know, there are not. I assume only the seeds would occur there. So that would be an interesting thing to look for, but as far as I'm aware, no, nothing's been identified yet.
Bob Davis says seed transport might be from bird migration, which goes everywhere.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, like I said, it's a little bit of a problem. This is also, I think, encountered a little bit of Pike Creek sinkhole too. It's like, you don't worry too much about things that really don't occur in Eastern North America today, and people aren't growing in their gardens. But other things, yeah, you might worry a little bit. You know, how do we establish if this is a contaminant or not? I think generally the fossils do look a little bit different than modern seeds, but it's always something to be aware of when you're working on this material.
Any other questions? Let's see.
And one more. I was really curious.
Jonathan, go ahead.
The Brandywine site in Maryland? I wasn't familiar with that one.
Yeah, so there was an early paper done on Brandywine. I think maybe it was from the 90s. I can't quite remember, where it just had a rundown of the flora, like preliminary identifications. And there have been a few other things published from the site. I think recently there was a plant called Pterocaria. This is another walnut family plant. And that one still occurs in Asia today. So it's another Asian connection. But a lot of that flora has not been formally described. And I don't know much about the site in terms of its, like, not in terms of the way the plants are preserved, but in terms of what's happened to it, I guess.
I know where I used to live out in that part of the world, so I did a lot of fossil hunting on the Calvert Cliffs. Found like I have a little hickory nut.
Oh, nice, nice.
Stuff that just kind of washed out, into the sea at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't know there was anything like more substantial than that in that sequence. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and it'd be interesting to get more data from there to kind of help piece together this puzzle of what these forests look like in the past.
Jonathan, I'm going to need to talk with you at some point because I'm from Brandywine.
Oh wow. We were just up there like a
Actually,
month ago.
Cheltenham. I attended elementary school at Brandywine, and I did not know there were fossils there. So this is intriguing. Bob Davis commented about the birds migration. Today, he says, today we don't know what ate Osage oranges, as an example. Thanks for this great presentation. I have the honor of volunteering in the garden at the Gray Fossil site. So please visit the garden when you visit. The garden is full of native plants that are representative of some of the plant fossils found there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Question.
Yes, Tim.
It's I noticed that some of the hickories and the oaks and other plants were represented at that time. But would it be fair to say there was a question about the pawpaws? So would it be fair to say that the biodiversity would have been much, much greater than what we find in the fossil form now? But that doesn't mean that it just means that this is what was preserved in the fossils, but there would have been many, many more things such as the pawpaw or other things that just didn't happen to get preserved there. Would that be true?
Yeah, so I mean, I talked about part of the flora. There's also the pollen flora. So there are things that may occur in the fruit and seed flora, but not in the pollen, and things in the pollen that aren't in the fruits and seeds. And then you may have things that are in neither. So this depends on things like for instance, type of pollination. So things that are insect pollinated might be less well represented than wind pollinated plants. How well the fruiting structures are going to preserve, maybe how close these things are actually living to the water. So there are a lot of factors in there that may be in favor of a plant being preserved, and a lot of factors that may be against it.
Hmm.
Yeah, so we're probably getting a small fraction, and we're probably getting things that are growing very close to this area. And if you have different types of habitats and whatever that are further away, they may not be well represented or represented at all.
Hmm.
Okay. Jane says, thank you for the information. The Davises said, the first time we went to Gray, there was some talk about a nearby site where leaf impression fossils had been found, but was not part of the official Gray site. Was that correct? And what is the status of that site today?
I do know that there have been leaf fossils found. I do not know what the status of that area is. So I can confirm there are leaf fossils. I can't tell you much about the rest of it.
Okay. Jane says, a fossil that appears to be silver in color, does it have any significance? It was leaf-like and in coal.
It may just be like often things that are in carbon or whatever might be shiny or silvery looking. I don't know if there's any really particular significance to it. It's probably just the preservation.
Okay. One comment, great presentation. Toby asks, is there also a collection bias since invertebrate preservation is a priority?
Collection bias at the site. Or, well, I can answer it both ways. So at the site, I don't think there's actually a lot of collection bias. They're trying to capture everything. In general, in the fossil record, there's a huge bias towards invertebrates, and that is because of the preservation. So the preservation of things in the marine realm, the preservation of things that are shelly or have hard parts, the record is far, far more complete than if you're working on terrestrial fossils in general.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Any other comments? I'm looking for hands. All right. Well, I am excited. I know, I'd love to know, where's the Brandywine site located that you mentioned? Do you know the town? Is that?
Oh, sorry. I just looked it up because I was so curious.
Yeah, okay,
I'm gonna be up there in a couple days. It was briefly exposed during construction.
Okay.
So it's one of these, it's not exposed at the cliffs. It's at the very top, it looks like, of the Miocene stuff there. So unless they're like building a subdivision on top of it right now, you can't see it.
Which in that area is very possible.
It's possible. I might go drive around there on Saturday and look.
That's where I grew up, so okay, but we'll talk later. Any other questions, comments? All right, without further ado, then I am going to say thank you very, very much, Liz.
Thank you.
I'm excited. I'm so thrilled to have this information. You've got me thinking in other directions, and like Jonathan, I want to go and look up some more stuff now, because the Calvert Cliffs he mentioned is on the banks of the Chesapeake Bay, and is where they come up with a lot of marine fossils at Calvert Marine Museum, is where a lot of them are stored. But I think anybody who's lived in that area for any length of time has some fossilized shark's teeth. I have one that's about this big.
Oh, nice.
So, and I've heard of whale vertebrae being found there in the cliffs. Yes.
There's one. Very nice.
Yeah, sure is. It's amazing what you can find. But yeah, it's an old haunt, so that also contributed to my fascination with fossils and just trying to understand where things come from
Mhm.
and how they've changed over time. So thank you. Thank you for a very informative talk. This has been fun. It's different from some of our talks, but in a good way, in a positive way. And before I say goodnight, I'm going to remind folks that next month we'll have Adam Bigelow talking about the wildflowers of Southern Appalachia. He does a lot of hiking out there, so it should be a lovely way of reminding ourselves where some of the places we want to go in spring. And then in December, we're going to do a panel discussion about native plant ordinances. There is a lot happening right now, and I'm excited to share it with everyone and hope for some folks to help with some of these ordinances. So, but we'll talk about that in December. So without further ado, I'm going to say goodnight to everyone. Thank you for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month. All right, and thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
It was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Look forward to visiting. Hopefully we'll be able to make it there. Memphis Botanic Garden will come in force.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, before you go, do you think, are there any like, I don't know, lessons or suggestions like these like Miocene and Pliocene floras for what we might see as the climate warms over the coming decades?
I mean, generally what we see in the plant fossil record is that plants are probably going to track habitats they can live in. So I think the question is we're seeing climate change, I guess sort of change the gradient of climate and where things might be able to live, and also precipitation and stuff. Is one, are the plants going to be able to move quickly enough to track the speed at which this is changing? The other thing is because we have fragmented habitats a lot, how much of a barrier is that going to be to plants being able to adjust their distributions to where they're adapted to living? So I do think we can get some general ideas about where plants could live in the future, by looking at climate models and looking at models of what their tolerances are, and all of these things can be done, but the question is what is actually going to happen, I think, is a little more up in the air.
We're not going to be around to see it eventually.
Yeah.
Maybe
Well,
some of the younger ones.
Told my children they might see alligators in the Tennessee River in their lifetime.
Yes.
It's not totally improbable.
Well,
They can
no,
find a way.
no.
Yeah, it's interesting times.
Mhm.
All right. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.